A little bit about me. I own a small publishing company, actually co-own it with two friends of mine, and we've been publishing emerging authors that are off the beaten path and I don't mean by like Dan Brown or anybody, but poets and erotic writers who write erotica, and we've done anthologies for the last 17 years. I have a publication called Poetic Diversity, the Lit Zine of Los Angeles. It's an online publication I've been doing since 2003. And so I've been writing and publishing since my 30s. I actually come from a background of artists. My parents were both professional photographers. My father was a musician and a carpenter and a photographer. My mother is a painter and a sculptor. My great aunt and uncle owned the first miniature, small press, custom bookbindery business in Southern California. And so I never actually thought of myself as actually coming into, because those were all the things I wanted to eschew. I thought they were lame, and now this is my life, or part of it. And I have to say that this presentation I have done once before. I did this at Golden Lotus earlier this year. I was browbeaten by Robert Maiello, the body master there. He's like, you're going to have to come and do this, or else. He was going to start teasing me mercilessly. And I have Heather to thank for this, because Heather wrote a wonderful essay for my blog called Alchemia Poetica, and I had asked writers that I knew to write essays on poets or on poetry, and she wrote a wonderful essay about Aleister Crow, and she wrote such a wonderful essay that it changed my mind about Crowley the poet. And I will still maintain, before I get into this, that Crowley wasn't the greatest of poets, but he did write some profound poetry, and overall, he was an amazing artist. In fact, he could have been one of the premier expressionist painters of his day if he kept with it. But that wasn't his mission on Earth. So it starts out here with the quote by Aleister Crow. The so-called poet with his vague dreams and ideals is indeed no better than a harmless lunatic. The true poet is the worker who grips life's throat and wrings out its secret, who selects austerely and composes concisely, whose work is as true and clean as razor steel, albeit its sweep is vaster and swifter than the sun's. Do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law.
Love is the law, love under will.
Introduction and Crowley as artist. Now, I've always been a writer, but I haven't always been a poet. It took many years to even be slightly comfortable for me with the term artist. This avocation took on a new and deeper meaning for me when I attended my first EGC Gnostic Mass in 2007. The nuances of art, as well as the process of creation, from the mundane to the esoteric, continue to fascinate me. I've been in the O.T.O for 10 years, and this journey on a profound level has been one of artistic development. Thelema arrived unannounced on my doorstep, but not unexpected on my doorstep. And the daily challenge to be true to my art and to realize my true will through the creative expression still and never will cease to amaze me. Now, our holy order encourages us to be active within the summum bonum, the great work for the greatest good, and to grow beyond the personal and social strictures. The power of poetry and art can impact the unconscious mind, which can lead to, if in accordance with one's true will, a spiritual awakening and a new evolutionary path. You can foster poetic or artistic practice to supplement and augment your rituals or magical process. And I'll give you examples from my own life and conclude with techniques for challenging yourself artistically. Now, there's no better example for this than our own prophet, Aleister Crow, who among his many endeavors and accomplishments was a competent and prolific poet, as well as a skilled expressionist painter. He was able to capitalize on his creative passions through his education, inheritance, and his polymathy. And he never let doubt get in his way. No, I can't do that was never in Crowley's vocabulary. Of course, this doesn't mean everything he produced was a masterpiece. In many instances, his desire to be a master poet fell short of his technical ability. However, even in this, he succeeded. Art was an essential part of Crowley's initiatory process. His poetry, plays, short stories, and paintings were as natural to him as climbing mountains or performing ritual. Crowley's rites of Eleusis with high drama, musical interludes, and long poetic soliloquies are one of his finest creations, where he introduced a subtle art of initiation for public consideration and consumption. The poems in the Rites of Eleusis are especially powerful, especially in the Rite of Luna, with the last speech of Pan, who's made an arduous journey through the wilderness to woo the moon goddess. In the last scene, Pan approaches the throne of Luna, who, as all the gods before her, must fall. The tetrameter, tight rhymes and rhythms and rhymes in Pan's final speech are, if recited properly, able to hold the audience spellbound, and brings this passion play to a fantastic conclusion. Here's why I asked for a volunteer from the audience. Would anybody like to read this Pan speech that I have here? Please.
Uncharmable charmer of Bacchus and Mars, in the sounding, rebounding abyss of the stars. O virgin in armor, thine arrows unsling in the brilliant, resilient first rays of the spring. By the force of the fashion of love when I broke, through the shroud, through the cloud, through the storm, through the smoke, to the mountain of passion, volcanic, that woke. By the rage of the mage, I invoke, I invoke. By the midnight of madness, the lone lying sea, the swoon of the moon, your swoon into me. The sentinel sadness of cliff-clinging pine, that night of delight, you were mine, you were mine. You were mine, O my saint, my maiden, my mate, by the might of the right of the night of our fate. Though I fall, though I faint, though I char, though I choke, by the hour of our power I invoke, I invoke. By the mystical union of fairy and fawn, unspoken, unbroken, the dusk to the dawn. A secret communion, unmeasured, unsung, the listless, resistless, tumultuous tongue. O virgin in armor, thine arrows unsling in the brilliant, resilient first rays of the spring. No godhood could charm her, but manhood awoke. O fiery Valkyrie, I invoke, I invoke.
Thank you. That was beautiful. Now, the impact of Crowley's Rites of Eleusis is still active today. There are many performances at O.T.O local bodies and by theater companies like Elusive Productions on national stages across the country. If you are all looking to know more about the history of the Rites of Eleusis, Lita Chappelle wrote a wonderful chapter in and I can't remember the name of the book, but it's a book of the history of O.T.O that was dedicated to Hymenaeus Beta. Now, Crowley, throughout his life, illustrated and painted a number of self-portraits, portraits of friends, lovers, dreams, and Kabbalistic images, some of which, in my opinion, influenced Rita Harris's paintings of the major arcana in the Thoth deck. And Crowley lived in Paris for a number of years, which at the time was the center of the European Expressionist art, and he was a great admirer of Auguste Rodin and Paul Gauguin. Now, Crowley's paintings are crude, jarring, and powerful, much like the works of Gauguin, Van Gogh, and Seurat. A closer study of Crowley's paintings can be seen in Kenneth Anger's short film, The Man We Want to Hang. It was made in 2002, and you can actually find a full cut of that on YouTube. Also in Volume 2 of the films of Kenneth Anger. Part 2, the importance of fostering a creative process. Magic is the science of understanding oneself and one's conditions. It is the art of applying that understanding in action. Aleister Crowley. The one thing you have that nobody else has is you. Your voice, your mind, your story, your vision. So write and draw and build and play and dance and live only as you can. The moment that you feel just possibly you're walking down the street naked, that's the moment you might be starting to get it right. That's from Neil Gaiman from Make Good Art. Break rules. Leave the world more interesting for you being here. Also by Neil Gaiman from Make Good Art. Clearly, Crowley left a bountiful legacy of poetry and art for ceremonial magicians to build upon, which is great. However, growing beyond our comfort zones is a necessary part of the initiatory process, and exploring your artistic and creative side, especially if it's not something you've done before, is a beneficial way to aid in your quest to find more about your true will and to connect with your higher self. Art on one level is an alchemical process, which is something Crowley intimately understood. O.T.O initiations are alchemical processes designed to refine as well as create a connection with our highest selves, and this can lead you to discover hidden depths of talents of which you may not be aware. Example: I come from a family of artists and musicians, the majority of whom are polymaths. Growing up in a family as accomplished as mine was a highly uncomfortable experience for me, as I am not a polymath, and one that I let stunt my growth in many areas. I clung to what I knew, which were words and books, and within that medium I stuck to what I'd already mastered. The first challenge to take my poetry into a new realm came when I took part in my first rite of Eleusis, the Rite of Mercury. As a probationer and before my Minerval, I felt incredibly intimidated by the luminaries who could slip into Crowley's avatar so easily. I didn't feel equal to the challenge of taking on a part of a magic ritual, much less a public magic ritual. During the course of rehearsals, I ended up taking on the role of Luna as the woman who had it before me stepped out. Unfortunately, she was also an accomplished violinist, and in leaving, she took the musical component away. So the sponsor of the rite assigned me to the task of writing a poem, which scared me enough to attain a bad case of writer's block. I wasn't Crowley, and I wasn't at the time adept in writing in rhyme, which was Crowley's poetic preference. As a contemporary poet who prefers the language and tropes of my time, and I still do, this was unexplored territory. I found myself waking up with panic attacks at 3 a.m. I was out of my depth, and then I remembered my reason for being on this path at this time. All of this, was what I had been searching my whole life for. Why would I throw that away? Because I wasn't comfortable? No. So I asked myself, what could I bring to the table to make this a success? Number one, I was a poet. Number two, I had a copy of the Book of the Law. And number three, I had a copy of the Ritual. And I was curious to see if I could pull it off. So over the next couple of days, I immersed myself in the language of Liberal and the Rite of Mercury. I also, and this is important, I gave myself permission to add to my contribution to the ritual. The poem I wrote is in a bref doublet form. It's the early form of the sonnet. Reflects the language of the rites of Eleusis. I performed it, veiled, enthroned, at the end of the rite, in front of an audience of 24 people in a small theater in the North Hollywood's Arts District. I performed that same poem a few months later in the Rite of Luna. Grieve not, but how shall I do this alone, amidst the faded glories of my brethren? The voice of Mercury echoes in my ears as he departs faster than a shooting star to disappear into the gathering dark. This begins the unknown reign of one unused to the vulgarities and hungers of immortal man and beast. And so far no wisdom has come to grace my throne on how to rule, and there is no one to guide me, to tell me how to stand on my own, to protect, comfort, or assuage the fears of those seekers who are most prone to smite a goddess with prayers and tears in their hour of need. Yet I will succeed as my god Mercury charged me to do. I decree no more tears or sorrow. Languor, love, and leaping laughter shall exist in all worlds for all times to come. If there is no one left to cede my rule, then all I wish for shall come to pass. Yet within the bright center of my being exists a secret, a need to enter the sign of silence, to grieve alone. I wish to be veiled, to recede into mystery. Alone, this world will grow. Innocence shall rule instead of greed. Silent, suspended, no need for tomorrow. Now, I've also written poetry along with my sister Sabrina McGuire for invocation and rituals we created together. And over the last 10 years, I write sonnets now on a regular basis. I grew as a poet, as a magician, and as a person. I removed "I can't do that" from my repertoire. There are many artists and musicians and writers in the order, and for every one of them, I have met two more initiates who inevitably say, "Wow, I wish I could do that." Guess what? If Crowley could, then I could. And if I could, then all of you can. Now, in creating poetry and art for ritual, you are in effect claiming this process as your own. You're adding your own original slant to the magical process, and you're breaking down barriers and unlearning behaviors enculturated us by a society who wants us to fail. Part 3, science, or preparing for your art. A magician is only as good as the weapon she's got, and the same thing is true for the artist at any level. Below are some suggestions for preparation, and I gathered most of these from various brothers and sisters around the United States. Read the poetry of Crowley, William Blake, Swinburne, and the other Gnostic saints. Attend local poetry open mics and take part in a poetry workshop. If you're ever in LA, there are free workshops through T-Bot Bach in Orange County and Beyond Baroque in Venice, California. You also have this lovely poetry center next door. Shame on them for being closed on Saturday, but they look like they got a good thing going there. I'm certain they have open mics and other workshops. Also, read the poetry of Shakespeare. Read modern poetry, a lot of which you can find for free on the internet. Plug for it, poeticdiversity.org. For art, go to museums, watch DIY YouTube tutorials, or take a class at your local community college or university. Number 2, if you keep a magical journal, also then keep a poetry or art journal. Write down your ideas, draw, paint, find a poetry form that you like or an artistic medium and practice it, like you would the Star Ruby or the Colics from Liber 15. And don't be afraid to make mistakes. That's part of the growth process. Set aside time on a daily or a bi-weekly basis for creative endeavors. Even if it's 15 minutes a day, you'll be surprised how quickly you'll grow in your new practice, as well as become proficient in your creative endeavors. Give yourself permission to fail and keep going. I can't stress that enough. The true failure is to stop doing what you are doing and listening to the naysayers who want to bring you down, including the naysayer within your head there. Don't compare yourself to the masters or any contemporary professionals. Crowley wasn't a master poet, though he could have become a master painter, and a better poet if he devoted himself to these pursuits on a full-time basis. Of course, he had a much bigger calling, otherwise we wouldn't be here. But it does take time to grow into your art. This is important, and this is the editor in me, and also, if you really want to claim this process as your own, recognize the difference between adaptation and plagiarism. When you adapt a previous work and add your own original parts like poetry or art, that is called adaptation. When you crib whole parts of another's work and change a line or two, that's called plagiarism, and it's wrong. Number 7, overcoming creative blocks. Now, this is a list of helpful practices to free up your creative processes from the book called Creative Block by Daniel Priestess. Number 1, take a stroll around the neighborhood. Often a creative block comes from an ability to stay focused on one task at hand. And in today's society where we're all living both virtual and regular lives, that's becoming an even bigger problem. Your mind feels overwhelmed or distracted by too many things. Your brain feels like a big knot, and only you can think of thing is your kitchen needs a cleaning, says German bass photographer Matthias Heydrich in Kreis's book. It makes sense to stop working then and to resharpen the senses. Heydrich's solution is what he calls once around the block, inspired by the name of a song by musician Badly Drawn Boy. Simply getting out of your chair, exploring your own neighborhood, paying attention to the houses and the sidewalks and the shop windows rather than staying stuck in your head, and a workspace can help re-energize you. Trying to see the banal objects around you in a new light can be a good brain boost, he says. Number 2, set tight parameters to play in. Having endless possibilities to choose from can be overwhelming and ultimately lead to a block. That's why setting rules or parameters for yourself can help you to start thinking creatively without getting lost in the wilderness of possibilities. Mixed media artist Trey Spiegel suggests making a drawing and photocopying it 50 times, then altering each image in as many ways as you could think of. The important thing is to turn off your brain and just play with the repeated form and let your mind see where no ideas or thought processes take you. He says, create your own type parameters, then give yourself a lot of room to play. I can give you a good example of this because I'm when the Great Recession hit, I stopped working in the nonprofit industry. I lost my job as a grant writer. And the first job I got was in sales. And the best salespeople do their process, and it's a creative one, by making everything binary. So if you're stuck with endless possibility, what this gentleman has suggested is to play with the form until you've exhausted that possibility. The other thing is to take two ideas and play them against each other until you figure out which one is the one that works for you. Number 3, never underestimate the power of willpower. Sometimes getting past a creative block simply means pushing through the resistance you're feeling. It's easy to run from a project that's giving you trouble, but sticking with it when you feel uncomfortable takes willpower. There will be one point in every project where I decide that my idea is absolutely stupid, says Christy Malakoff, a Canadian-based artist who makes large installations using cut paper. It's just pure willpower that gets me through these moments. I'm sure every one of you has had that happen in some aspect of your life. You could be working on a ritual, or you could be working on a painting, or you might be building something, you're working on a computer program or an app, something that you are, everything we do is a creative process. So we're going to look at it in the grand scale of things. But you get to that point, it's almost like running a marathon where you're like, oh my God, I'm at the 24th mile and I got 2 miles to go and I'm so tired, I want to lay down and go, I can't do this. That's the time you need to push, and you just need to get through it, because getting through it is 90% of the success. Number 4, don't wait for inspiration. Inspiration doesn't just strike, it's cultivated. Waiting around for the perfect moment to launch into a project or tackle a creative challenge will keep you waiting for a long time. Just do the work, advises South African ceramics artist Ron Hoffman. Through work comes new ideas and the spark to either follow and develop, or develop and then abandon, he says. One place Hoffman finds inspiration is in the words of painter and photographer Chuck Close, when he says, "Inspiration is for amateurs. The rest of us just show up and get to work. If you wait around for the clouds to part and a bolt of lightning to strike you in the brain, you are not going to make an awful lot of work. All the best ideas come out of the process. They come out of the work itself. Things occur to you." The best example of this that I can think is one of my favorite books ever, written by Alan Lightman, called Einstein's Dreams. And it's the story of Einstein when he was a patent clerk. And the story is that he goes to the patent clerk office before everybody else gets there, and he does lucid dreaming. He's basically like quality testing all the aspects of the theory of relativity. And some of the, and it's told in these wonderful little flash fiction stories, some of the ideas about the theory of relativity that he's testing out in his brain work way better than others. But he pushed on through until he could codify and solidify his thesis, which he ended up having proved right by the physicist. Number 5, seek out an assignment. Getting past a creative block means stepping outside of your comfort zone. If you feel uncomfortable, you're pushing your boundaries. And that's where the good ideas start to take shape. Inspiration is for amateurs. The rest of us just show up and get to work. Ask someone close to you to give you an assignment, says collage and mixed media artist Holly Chastain. Make sure it's not an idea that you have frequented on a regular basis in your work. Keep true to your vision and technique as you work. I run into this with my poetry friends, and I do this all the time. We give each other ideas, we give each other assignments, or we'll give ourselves assignments. I did this a few years ago. I was hitting a massive writer block, and I decided that I was going to do 100 days of poetry. I was going to sit down and write poetry. It didn't matter. I got to day 87, and then I ended up going to the emergency room because my mother had a mild stroke. So that threw me off. But I ended up with a somewhat decent body of work, but enough that I was able to put together one of my favorite chapbooks ever. I just kept doing it, but I'm not the kind of person that likes to write on a regular basis. I like to write, like, I'll be working in my head on several ideas at a time, and then they all come out, and I kind of just work on those, and then I put them away, and then I'll go on to the next thing. So getting past a creative block, or getting past my own usual process, which can lead to creative blocks, was a real challenge for me, and I'm glad that I did it. I will say that 32 of those 87 poems were crap, but at least I stuck to my commitment until something came and interrupted it. But I'm glad I did it. Put random things together to tell a story. What story are you trying to tell? Whether you're working on a design project or trying to come up with a solution to a technical problem or writing a book, you're telling a story. What is that story, and how can you tell it in a new way? The human brain seems to want to understand things, says Swedish-based painter and illustrator Camilla Engman. If you put two things together, it immediately starts to think about why and what. For me, that makes up a story. My new chapbook that's coming out, and no, I'm not talking about this so you go can buy it. I hope you do, but that's okay. I decided to read the Iliad, and I had never read it before. And I found a quote in there that gave me the idea for a story. I've always wanted to write a science fiction book. I ended up writing a science fiction narrative poetry book. It's called Fourth Planet from the Sun. It'll be published someday. About the war god Ares being exiled on Mars by Zeus. And we're going to be going to Mars within the next few years. And so you have this crazy, chaotic god who's been exiled on Mars for the longest time, being faced with the fact that he's about to meet humans again. And so he's kind of going through this thing of like, okay, humans are coming, but they're not the humans that I remember from, the primitive world. There's all these weird things that are being sent my way. There's all these, he calls them automatons, like all this, the things that we've been sending over the last 50 years to Mars. And he's gotten to the point where it's like been thousands of years, and he's been alone with his own thoughts. He's actually starting to question his own existence. So I didn't realize at the time that I was taking classical Greek myth and like this sci-fi nerd, and I was merging them into two things. I was really excited to actually be able to produce what I thought was just going to be a poetry chapbook, but turned out to be fulfilling a long-standing item on my bucket list, which is to write a science fiction book, even though it's in poetry. So I never saw those two things actually coming together. So when I finally finished, I was like, holy crap, I did that. And it took me to a new level of realizing that, yeah, I can do that. And at the same time realizing that, yeah, I did that. And if I can do that, any of you could do that. So, number 7, dare to go against what you know. We often turn to the same solutions or strategies for solving creative challenges that were used in the past. You probably developed a certain style that is unmistakably yours. Your creative muscle has become strong, maybe overbearing. It's time to stretch, says Canadian-based painter Fiona Ackerman. Ackerman suggests trying to do something unfamiliar or unrecognizable to the work you've done in the past. This exercise always helps me break out of what I'm feeling when I'm feeling bored with myself, she says. When I first started working the deacon role, I started right after I took even before I took my first degree. And as someone who likes being in charge and being the deacon role is kind of a fixed role in many ways, and also the magical portion of it, being the magician, all of these things resonated with me greatly, and I would deacon at any chance I got, and I did this for almost 2 years. When I took my second degree, everything shifted, and I talked to my bishop about it, and I was like, I don't understand why this isn't really appealing to me anymore. And she said, you need to look at the word deacon. Deacon means servant in Greek. And it had never occurred to me to even look at it from that point of view. I was looking at it from I'm driving the bus. I'm not looking at it as I'm here to serve the congregation or to serve my brethren. That was a very humbling experience for me, but it also in working with that and for me, I'm very ego-driven. Even I totally admit it. To have to put aside my ego, and I did this consciously for the greater good, gave me an invaluable lesson in learning about service within the order. It did improve my appreciation of the Mass, and it also improved my performance as a deacon and as clergy overall. And I'm glad that I did that, because it is not in my nature to put aside my ego. It really isn't. So for me, even on a daily challenge, I have a problem with that. And I have to keep challenging myself, otherwise I don't grow. Number 8, take to the road. Trying to see your neighborhood or block in a new way, as Heydrich suggests, can be a useful way to train your brain to recognize new details around you. By putting yourself in an entirely new and unfamiliar surrounding can also have the effect of re-energizing you in unexpected ways. Taking to the road with my camera never fails to inspire me, says photographer and writer Jen Altman. Sometimes it's not only the act of the voyage, however short it may be, but the state of mind that envelops you as the road widens. Some of my best ideas have come as I'm chasing the sun across the horizon. My favorite exercise is to take long walks. I cannot run because I had my ankles destroyed in a car accident when I was 11. And frankly, when you have a double D rack, you can't really go running anyway because people start looking at you strange, and wearing 3 bras is a bitch. So in my neighborhood, and I'm actually where I live, is great for walking, and I've mapped out like 4 or 5 routes that go between like 3 to 6 miles each. But you get really bored after a while doing all those, so I started walking them backwards. I started combining them different ways, and it was really, and I started doing them at different times of the day because I work from home, so I can do these early in the morning, in the afternoon, or even in the evening. I got to meet some neighbors I'd never met before. I got to see the neighborhoods at different times, and they looked totally different to me. And I got to just experience my familiar environment in a whole new way that I didn't think was possible. I also learned which areas to avoid, especially late at night. So that was a good thing for me to know. And I also ended up helping save someone's life who came out and was came out of his house, was going into a diabetic coma, and there was nobody around. I had my phone. I was able to call 911 and get the paramedics there. So if I hadn't done that, I probably wouldn't still be walking. I would be sitting in front of the couch eating bonbons. Number 9, start again. Often getting out of a rut requires trashing the whole thing and starting from scratch. Instead of trying to untangle the mess you're in, what about setting it aside and creating a new mess using what you've learned from the first attempt? When the try fails, set it aside and start over again. Draw something on a piece of paper. Stare at it. Trash it. Draw it again on another piece of paper. Stare at it. Trash it. Repeat. Suggest collage and mixed media artist Arian Bazzotti. Once you feel you're done, uncrumple all the pieces of paper and line them up in order. Seeing the progress you've made, the attempts you took and abandoned, will help you not only make progress, but also learn from the process you used to get there. I think this applies to the artistic process, but more importantly, it also applies to the importance of keeping a magical journal. If you're working, say, with with Reguli, and you decide to keep a journal for, say, 6 months, if you don't feel like you're actually getting anywhere, put aside the practice for, say, a month and go back and look over your journal. You've kept a record of your progress. I guarantee you're going to see your progression. Number 10, go towards what scares you most. If something scares you, instead of avoiding it, try getting as close to it as you can, except for rabid dogs. Fear can be a powerful motivator, and embracing your fears can help you get over a block. Painter Lisa Golightly suggests making a list of the 3 creative things you're most afraid to try, and then forcing yourself to do these things. Fear is a big motivator for me, says Golightly. A college professor once told me that if I was afraid of something, that meant I had to do it. That has basically shaped my life. The first Gnostic Mass I went to, the priestess at that Mass was my very good friend, Sandra Scott Rogers. Mm-hmm. And with her this was at LVX Lodge, and there were 4 priestesses there, all of whom were magnificent and beautiful and amazing, and I let that intimidate me from trying to do that's why I ended up deaconing longer than I think I probably should. I did not move into the priestess role right away. I didn't do it for 3.5 years because I was surrounded by so many amazing women that were natural and beautiful and graceful, and I was like, there's just no way that I'm going to end up doing this. And so I started practicing on my own without anybody, without any help, and then I approached Deb Woody, who was the past master of Blue Horizon, and she agreed to teach me. And she didn't have, we did like two practices, and she said, "You're ready." And I'm like, "Huh?" She said, "No, you're ready." She made it easy for me because she's a very good instructor. With the tradition at the lodge at that time was to have novice clergy do a private mass and then do a public mass. I wasn't given that opportunity. I had to do a public mass as my first mass. And I did it with my bishop, and when the mass was over, and I was still kind of feeling kind of resentful because everyone else got to do that extra mass, my bishop told the congregation that it was my first mass, but nobody had known that. So I realized at that time, like the next day I was sitting there and I was like, holy shit, I can't believe I scared myself out of such a wonderful opportunity. And the life that we lead as initiates and being on this path is very frightening, especially with the present times we live in. This is the time more than ever to get out of our comfort zones and to make good art, as Neil Gaiman says, and to be our art and to live our art. If there's anything you guys, and I'm sorry if I'm getting a little emotional here, if there's anything that you all take away from here tonight, be your art. Be the magicians that you are. Be the summum bonum. Be that to the best of your ability. And do that, if it's only for 30 seconds a day, just do that, if no one else, but for your own true will, as a realization of your own true will. We're all here for that purpose. And that is my dearest and sincerest wish for all of you. Now, I do hope that these techniques will be useful for you. Everyone in this room is capable of the growth that artistic endeavors produce. Challenging yourself both artistically and poetically has released both spiritual and alchemical revelations in my life. Using poetry and art as well as ritual to face your fears and challenge social stigmas fits into the great work, if it is your will. Love is the law, love under will.